Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in Los Angeles, California. I hope everyone's having a happy day. I hope you're healthy. I hope you're staying safe. I hope you're having fun. Today in Critter Chat, we're going to talk about an animal who has, for centuries, filled human culture as symbols of wisdom, warnings of doom, and mystical or magical powers. Today, we're going to talk about owls. Today is also World Environment Day. That was created by the United Nations for us to take a moment to think about the environment we live in and how the environments we live in affect our lives and the lives of other living things around us, and how we can all work a little better, do a little more to help out the environment. So for starters, as I started looking into owls more and more, I thought I knew quite a bit about owls. I thought I knew a decent amount about how many there were, and I was very wrong. I assumed that there would be like maybe 50 kinds of owls, and I was way wrong on that. There's over 205 species that have been identified, and they divide them into two different families of owls. The family Strigidae, which are called typical owls, and the family Titanidae, which are the barn owls. And the big difference there is their face shape. Typical owls have a round face shape, and barn owls have more of a heart face shape, kind of bigger at the top and then very narrow down at the bottom of their face. Excuse me. In the typical owls, there are 189 different species, and in the barn owls, there are 16 species. So together, that gives us 205 species of owls around the world. And they live pretty much everywhere. Everywhere except Antarctica, there are owls. So there are owls at the North Pole. There are owls in the deserts. There are owls in mountains and in forests and in cities. There are owls on the plains and in grasslands. So there are owls pretty much everywhere, including tropics as well, tropical forest. And by and large, they are highly adapted to be night hunters. Now, some of them specialize in hunting during the day, and so some of those adaptations are less important for them and maybe not as obvious. But we're going to go through some of those adaptations because it's really what makes the group of owls very unique. For starters, let's talk about their sense of vision. Owls have amazing vision. They actually have the best night vision of any animal. That is because their eyes are really huge compared to the size of their skull. Because of this, they're such huge eyes that let the light in, that they can see really great at night. They don't have room for muscles around their eyes to allow their eyes to move within their head. Their eyes are always fixed straight ahead. They can't move their eyes. But to compensate for that, they have incredibly flexible necks, and they can move their head very great distances. So for us, we can move our head almost 180 degrees. So like from here to here, right? Owls can move theirs 270 degrees. So they can't go full circle with their head, but they can turn their head so far behind them and back the other way so far behind them that they can almost see everything around them. With that, they get fixed vision. So both eyes are always looking at the same thing, the same place, and that gives them incredible focus. That allows them to see really clearly very far. So they have extremely amazing vision. The best night vision of any animal ever. They also have incredible hearing. And this is some pretty ingenious things that they've adapted to have. So they have really large holes in the side of their skull for their ears. Their ears aren't like ours. We have outer ears. They don't have that. They just have holes that open. Inside it kind of works very similar. But their large ear holes also take up a bunch of room in their brain, are in their skull. And their ears are asymmetrical. That means they don't line up. So most of us, most animals, our ears are in the same place on each side. Some people are a little different. I'm one of those. One of my ears sits a little higher than the other. But for owls, it's greatly different. So one's like up here and one's down here. But that allows them to really target in and hear sounds from different places. And those ears are covered up with feathers, so we can't really see them, but if you look at an owl's skull, you can see it. In addition to their ears being kind of off-center from each other, their face is very much, they call it a facial disc. Their face is almost like a shallow bowl tilted up on its end. And with that, the bone of their face helps to draw the sound into their ears. That helps them to really kind of precision hear where the sounds are coming from and really focus audibly where the sounds are, which helps them to be extremely great hunters as well. They estimate that most owls could hear a mouse step on a twig 75 feet away. That's pretty impressive hearing, and that certainly helps them to be excellent hunters. Also, most owls have very silent flight. Kind of like that Christmas song, Silent Night. This is silent flight. But they are able to do that because most birds, on their outer feathers on their wings, the feathers are very rigid and very stiff. That can make some very loud noises as they flap their wings. If you've ever been near an extremely large bird as it's taken off or flown, you've heard those sounds. I've had that opportunity with a couple of different bird species I've worked with. Specifically, hornbills are very loud flyers. Owls are almost silent because the edges of those feathers are very soft and fluffy. And that helps to really dampen any sound that's made as the feathers on the wings move through the air. If you've ever had an owl fly over you, most likely you will never hear it. You may see it, but you won't hear it. I've been at places where they've done shows with birds and had an owl fly over the crowd, and people cannot hear the owls fly over. It's really pretty amazing, their silent flight. Now, not all owls have that adaptation. Specifically, there's a group of owls that don't have that are called fishing owls. I'm like, what is a fishing owl? I mean, clearly it's an owl that eats fish, but like, I didn't know that existed, so I looked into that. And there's multiple species. Most of them are in Africa or in Asia, and they live in tropical forests, which is probably why I didn't know about it. USA doesn't have a lot of tropical forest or places where there's a lot of forest area with lots of rivers running through it, and that's what these owls, their habitat is like. But they are a wide-ranging group of owls from little to big, that specialize in hunting fish. Most of them are different sizes, different shapes, different colors, different environments, cold forest, hot forest, tropical forest, drier forest, well, not drier forest because they need water, but mostly forested areas with a lot of water. Some of them are daytime hunters, some of them are crepuscular or afternoon and early morning hunters. Some of them hunt for fish at night, specifically hunting more on nights with a bright moon, which is pretty impressive that they can hunt for fish. I thought it was really cool. Owls, that brings us up that owls aren't always nocturnal. We kind of associate that with owls, and most owls are. Most owls are nighttime hunters, but not all owls. There's a species of owl that lives close to where I am here in Los Angeles and throughout the desert southwest called the burrowing owl. They are incredibly great at living a life in the daytime. They live in burrows under the ground. Typically those are made by things like prairie dogs or ground squirrels, and they live not necessarily in LA, but a little further inland from here. They live throughout that area and into the Great Plains of the United States as well, where they typically live in prairie dog tunnels and are really good at living a daytime life. They typically hunt very small things like mice or insects. Which brings up, what do owls eat? Owls will eat a wide variety of things. The smallest owls specialize in hunting insects. Some owls do eat other birds. Some owls eat other owls. But owls' main thing that most owls eat are rodents. So things like mice and rats, squirrels, sometimes bigger things like rabbits. There's even some owls that have hunted monkeys or deer or small forest antelopes. So they will go after a wide variety of things. They are a bird of prey. That means they have really good talons. They actually have a foot kind of shaped like a parrot that's called zygodactyl. That means they have 4 toes, and 2 toes face forward, 2 toes face back. And with that, they're able to really work to move very well on branches, in trees and stuff. But they can also reposition a toe so that they have 3 going forward and 1 going back, like most birds of prey have, like eagles or hawks. Speaking of their cousins, eagles and hawks, those birds typically spend a lot of time flying way up high, soaring over things like fields, looking for food, covering great distances. Owls will sometimes cover great distances, but they typically fly very low to the ground. Typically, if they're in a forest environment, they'll fly through the trees, not above the trees. In a desert environment, they fly just feet off the ground looking for food. Or in a grasslands environment, the same. Typically, they do that so they can move in on their prey very quickly. And especially with their silent flight, their very quiet feathers, they can move in very quickly, very fast, without their prey species noticing. So we talked a little bit about how they live almost everywhere in Antarctica. I was curious how many live here in North America. And there are 37 owl species that have been identified in North America. And they range all the way from the Arctic, the snowy owls, down into Mexico and the tropics of Central America. They live in all kinds of habitats. There are some that do very well in and around cities. You may have owls near you. I know I have heard owls at night in my yard, in my neighborhood. So it's pretty amazing how quickly they can adapt to living in a lot of variety of habitats. Now, not all owls can live well in a city environment, and that has caused some problem for some owls around the world. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I wanted to talk a little bit about owl size. So in North America, our biggest owl is the kind of owl that I put up on the picture earlier today on Instagram and Facebook. That is called a great gray owl. That's the tallest owl in North America. They can be 32 inches tall from the top of their head to the bottom of their tail feathers when they're seated. So they look really huge. They also have about a 60-inch wingspan. That's 5 feet from tip to tip. My wingspan or arm span is about 6 feet, so it's a bit shorter than what I can reach. They only weigh 2 to 3 pounds. So even though they're this big looking bird, they're very lightweight. And that reminded me that, like with all birds, their bones are hollow to help them fly really well. And so they usually don't weigh very much. And with the great gray owl, most of the bulk that we see is feathers. So there's actually 2 owls that live in North America. The snowy owl, those are the ones that live up north in the polar areas of Alaska and Canada. And the great horned owl, which lives just about everywhere in North America. They actually weigh more than the great gray owl. They weigh in between 3 and 4 pounds. So they're still not very big weight-wise, but they do weigh more than their cousin. Now the smallest owl in the world and in America is called the elf owl. And elf owls are just little guys. They're only 5 to 6 inches tall. They only weigh 1.5 ounces. So they're just little tiny lightweight owls. They don't go after things like rodents because they're too small. They go after things like insects, focusing on things like crickets and grasshoppers. They typically live in kind of a desertish environment and do very well eating the bugs that live there. So our biggest owl here is the great gray owl, as far as its height and its wingspan, but it's not the biggest in the world. The biggest in the world is one of those fish owls, and it's actually called the Blakiston's fish owl, and it lives in 3 countries: Russia, China, and Japan. In Japan, it only lives on the furthest north island of Hokkaido. But they live in a very forested area with lots of running water. They are also one of the most endangered owl species because much of their forest is being cut down. But these big owls can weigh 8 pounds with a 6.5 wingspan. So that means if they were standing with me and stretched out their wings like I stretch out my arms, their wings would be wider than my arms are, which is pretty impressive for an owl. Now with the owls, let's talk a little bit about their conservation status. 4 types of owls, 4 species, are extinct. They're gone. 2 of those lived on an island off the coast of Africa called Mauritius. Mauritius was also home to another famous bird that is also extinct called the dodo. But those 2 owls are gone. On the next island over, called Reunion, there was another owl that is also extinct. And the 4th extinct owl comes from, or did live, on the islands of New Zealand. And that owl is also no longer with us. In addition to the 4 extinct owls, 6 owls are critically endangered. 9 owls are endangered, 19 species are vulnerable, and 23 are near threatened with extinction. That means of the 205 species of owls, 61 are somewhere on that endangered species schedule listing. And there's a lot of threats facing owls. The biggest is habitat loss. I mentioned that with the Blakiston's fish owl. Their forests are getting cut down. Owls typically that live in forests need the trees to have a place where they can nest, to have a place where they can rest, to have a place where they can raise their chicks. And with the trees gone, that causes a lot of problems. Some owls also struggle when there's people that move into an area. They don't like people around, they don't like the noise, they don't like lights, and that really can throw off their balance and drive them to try to move to other places. Also, when people move into a forest, they cut down all the trees, that disappears. Sometimes there's other things that happen with the forest. Things like forest fires have caused a lot of problems for a lot of species of owls. Many of those forest fires can be attributed to the warming planet, droughts, and things like that, all resulted from climate change. So those are things that we need to always be worried about because it affects so many species. With many forest animals, easy way we can all help out is when we're buying wood or paper, look for the FSC logo, FSC, Forest Stewardship Council. It's usually a little green logo with a tree and a check mark. That means that that lumber or that wood or the paper that came from wood was raised on agricultural land, not cut down from a forest where forest animals were hurt in the process. FSC. Always look for that when you're buying wood or paper. Our special shout out today is to a group called the Owl Research Institute. They have a lot of really great information. There's tons of information out there about owls. People who study birds are called ornithologists. They're a very passionate group of people, so there's a lot of information about most bird species. I'll be sharing some really great links later today on the Facebook page. Today is also World Environment Day, so I will be sharing some information about that as well. And then of course I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience with owls. As a zookeeper, I never specifically took care of owls. I did help 1 or 2 days helping keepers during my training time that were taking care of owls, but my involvement was very, very minor. I would help prepare some food, which would be thawing out some mice or rats so they could eat those, and maybe help clean up a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about owls and eating. So they have a beak that's really sharp, right? Because they're a raptor or a bird of prey. So as they use that sharp beak to pull apart their food, they don't have any teeth. No birds do. So they swallow big chunks of their prey or their food whole. With that means that they swallow fur and bones and little gristly parts that are hard to digest. And with owls, after they swallow that, their body, their digestive system digests all of it, and what is not digestible comes back up. That's called an owl pellet. That's one of the really great ways that scientists use to study owls. Under a big tree where owls may have a nest, they'll find owl pellets on the ground. They're usually about this big, sometimes a little smaller. It's kind of like a cat coughing up a hairball. But it's the little bits and pieces, and scientists who study birds, ornithologists, dissect the owl pellets. So they take it apart, they look at it under a microscope, they can do DNA tests to see what it is the owls are eating. Often in an owl pellet, you'll see little bones from a rodent, or something bigger. If it's eating something like a rabbit, you'll find little bones like that. But it's very important for the study of owls to help figure out what they're eating, how much they're eating, and sometimes they can test it to see if their food is healthy. That's another big threat for owls, is when people are poisoning things like rodents, rats, mice, that kind of thing. If you don't want that around, and if you're putting out poison, it often has a really negative effect on the predators who eat those animals. If there's a mouse or a rat or something that eats the poison and then is running around on the fence just after it ate the poison, and an owl eats the mouse or the rat, they're going to eat all of it. The bones, the hair, what's in their stomachs, all of it. And that poison often affects the predator that's there to actually help control the rodent population. And so poisoning of predators is a big problem. That's a side effect when you try to poison things like rats and mice that you don't want around. I would encourage you, if you have a problem with rats and mice around your home, to use things like traps that will be a little better in getting rid of the mice or rats you may want, but it's not a poison that's causing problems throughout the food chain and hurting other animals. Better yet, if you could let nature take its course and allow predators to live in the area, and for them to solve the problem, that can also be very helpful. Back to some of my experiences with owls. So as a zookeeper, I never did a lot with owls. However, as a zookeeper, I was often treated to being in a place where owls thrive in the wild. Both at the Phoenix Zoo and the Los Angeles Zoo where I worked, there were wild owl populations who lived on zoo grounds. And it was a great thrill to hear them, to see them, and to know that they were helping us out by catching any mice and rats that we didn't want around the zoo. They did very well living in our zoo environment as wild birds. Specifically at the Phoenix Zoo, we had a family of great horned owls that would nest every year in a clump of palm trees at the zoo. And we would often be able to find out where they were in the spring, and we would usually set up a telescope for people to come and look and observe the wild owls that live there. And over a couple of weeks, we would be able to see the chicks grow up and then fly away. Owls, like most birds, grow really quick, so the chicks are usually go from hatching out of an egg to being big enough to fly and look like their parents within about 4 to 6 months, depending on the species, which is really quick growth if you compare that to something like a mammal. There are very few mammals that grow that fast. Like I say, I've also seen and heard owls in my neighborhood, particularly great horned owls. They are one of the species that do best around people. And living in Los Angeles, I live in a big city, but I have heard them at night in my neighborhood here. I also saw and heard them quite often in my neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona, where they do very, very well in a desert environment. I encourage you to try to find out what owls live around your house. And if you're interested in owls, I will post a link on a website that identifies some of their different sounds and where they live. And you can listen for the different sounds and see if you can identify an owl by their sounds. We typically think of them hooting. That is a great horned owl that kind of makes a hoot sound. You can usually hear a slight difference between two owls if they're calling. One would be the male, one would be the female. They don't stay together year round, so they only find each other during breeding season. And they'll use their vocalizations to find each other. But there's other owls that make lots of different sounds. So there's some that sound more like screeches, some that sound more like other birds, some that sound like frogs. And there's a lot of different owl sounds out there. And it's really interesting to listen to the different sounds of owls and see if you can hear those on a calm, quiet night in the area you live or an area that you may visit if you visit out in the forest or a campground or somewhere where there may be more owls around. As always, like, follow, share, and subscribe to any of my content on ZooNerd and on my website at jeremythezoonerd.com, where more information is uploaded frequently and full episodes of the Critter Chats will always live, as well as YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. That's what I have to share today about owls. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you take some time to learn a little more about how you can help owls, and on this World Environment Day, ways that you can help out your local environment and other environments around you, whether that's in a city, a beach, a forest, mountains, grasslands, or wherever you may live. See what you can do to help make our planet a little bit better. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow. Have fun. Be safe. Be happy. Bye.